Welcome aboard the Athletics Can't Wait Jets podcast, your nonstop shop for all things Jets with Tim McMaster, Zack Rosenblatt, and Marissa Dunn.
Can't wait!
The NFL season is over, and we are back on the Can't Wait podcast. The rest of the NFL teams that were in the playoffs and went to the Super Bowl have joined the Jets in offseason mode. Thanks for joining us. Tim McMaster here, along with Zack Rosenblatt, our Jets reporter at The Athletic, and Marissa Dunn, our super producer. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl. We're going to talk about Zack's 10-point plan for turning this Jets team around and having a successful offseason. We're going to revisit the picks because it's over. We have a winner. We're hoping he can join us on the show as well. We'll start with the Super Bowl, guys. Before we get into the Super Bowl, we did want to make note of the fact that really the tragedy that happened yesterday at the Super Bowl parade, the shootings in Kansas City, obviously awful. People there to celebrate and ended up being terrified, and one person obviously lost their life. So we did want to make note of that before we started, that we are thinking of everybody out in Kansas City as we think about this Super Bowl and talk a little bit about the Super Bowl and what went down in Las Vegas, which was the Kansas City Chiefs winning another Super Bowl, and Zack, Mecole Hardman catching the game-winning touchdown.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was not going to happen any other way. He had a big catch earlier in the game too, but yeah, just to be the game-winning catch in the Super Bowl, like the last play of the NFL season, is the guy that the Jets cast aside because they couldn't figure out how to use him or whatever. It was pretty perfect. And then to top it all off, the Jets decided shortly after that to come out with an announcement that they're going to have new jerseys, which is just very fascinating timing for them. Very Jetsy in timing. I didn't really. You got to wait. You can't do that the night of the Super Bowl when. I know they didn't plan on Mecole Hardman being the guy. I'm sure it was a scheduled tweet or whatever, or maybe not because it was overtime. But yeah, it was a lot of like quintessential Jets stuff going on there. I mean, it was more funny that it was a Jets player, like more than I think like Mecole. They didn't really have a plan for Mecole Hardman when they signed him. Obviously, part of the plan was Aaron Rodgers. Whatever reason, he didn't connect with his coaching staff. Couldn't get on the field. And so they traded him, and then you move on with your life. But, I mean, anytime the Jets give up somebody, they haunt you later. I kind of thought Dalvin Cook would have had that kind of moment this postseason too, but he didn't. But it just ultimately didn't work out for Mecole here. I think it was poor planning on the Jets' part, and you definitely can criticize them for it. I don't think it's worth, like, it was more like funny than anything. Like, I don't think it's a referendum on the Jets as much as like we want it to be, but it was just like funny because one of the very few like notable guys, like he was on the Jets this season, and
he was in Hard Knocks predicting a Super Bowl win over the 49ers, which turned out to be true for him personally.
That was crazy to me. I'm like, oh my God, like what are the odds of that?
It just made me think of it with the Magic. I think Sauce Gardner had a hilarious tweet like yesterday or the day before where he said he did some he saw some magic trick, and he was sure that he only had a card in his hand, and then the magician did whatever, and all of a sudden there was a glass in his hand. He's like, I'm never going back to Vegas. I'm not gonna do it.
Well, good thing for the Jets, the Super Bowl is not there next year.
Yeah. It sounded like there was no problems with it being in Vegas. Like I didn't really hear about anything.
You know what was fascinating to me though is Jim Nance took every possible opportunity during the broadcast to like throw in little gambling references, right down to the winning touchdown where he said jackpot. And it's just such a difference when you think back like 10 years ago and what every professional sport thought about, well, in this country, thought about Vegas and gambling and all of that. And now it's just like, it's everywhere. It's accepted. It's part of the broadcast. Al Michaels was the only one who made it part of the broadcast when it was taboo, right? He would always get those little comments in late in the game about, well, somebody's still paying attention to this game. But for Jim Nance to get, I think there was 4 or 5 times during the game where he got little gambling references, and it was crazy. But that's where we are now.
Yeah. What do you guys think? How'd you think about how Nance and Romo did? I thought Romo is just like talks too much.
So Andrew Marchand now.
Yeah, Andrew Marchand we just hired. He wrote a review that I agreed with. It seemed like some fans were mad. They thought he was being nitpicky, but I thought the most important thing was at the end, like he was talking too much during the final play, so he like ruined Jim Nance's moment. Like you're supposed to let the play-by-play get that. I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that next year Tom Brady might be calling the Super Bowl, which I think Tom's actually going to be like very good. I'm actually, I mean, he's Tom Brady. Who knows? And you never know with these guys when they, especially he doesn't really have that much training. I know there's been some stories about how he's like gone in and done some test runs with Kevin Burkhardt. I thought Greg Olsen actually was very, very good as like
that's the shame is that Greg Olsen is probably the next,
not going to be
the best guy, and he's going to be the number 2 there because of Brady.
I am fascinated by the Brady thing because I mean so I think this has been on purpose. He has like a podcast or whatever, and some clips come out every now and then of him like ranting about things. Like if he brings that level of personality to the broadcast, he could be very, very good. And there's obviously nobody has a better mind for football than him. So, and we've seen like what the Peyton Manning and Eli broadcast is a little fun. So I'm fascinated to see how the Brady one does. I think generally it's hard. I feel like most of these broadcasters, like they have like an impossible job. Like you're not going to please everybody and stuff like that. I think some are better than others. I think Romo in the beginning was like a very like, he's predicting the plays and all that stuff. It just seemed like that shtick kind of got old pretty quick, and that he's getting paid like $30 million a year for his job. So he did what he had to do, I guess. But
I think Romo's fine, but I agree. He's not like, the superstar that people thought he was going to be when he first started. Go ahead, Marissa.
To bring this all back to the Jets, I'm going to call it now. It's the Jets' first game of the season is going to be back in prime time. And who's going to be in the booth but Tom Brady?
Oh, wow. Tom Brady making fun of the Jets is what just
with Aaron Rodgers back under center.
Oh, man.
I'm making a prediction now on February 15th.
Unfortunately, the Jets aren't playing the Packers, like because there was a chance they could have. And that would have been such a perfect season opening primetime game.
Yeah.
Zach, you mentioned Brady and the clips that are good from his podcast. I mean, how about the Dunk Kings?
Oh yeah, that was one of the better commercials. Yeah, that was good. There was I didn't watch it yet, but there's like an extended version that just came out too.
That's good. If you go to the Duncan Instagram, they have there's all these different videos.
I think sometimes like they spend so much. First, you have to pay like however much, like $7 million or whatever, for it to even air, and like so. And they also got Tom Brady, J-Lo, Ben Affleck, and Matt Damon all in this commercial. Like, and those people don't have cheap. Like they just made so much money for like a couple days. Like that one was more production value than most commercials. I actually saw. I didn't even see this live, but I guess Kanye West paid $7 million for an ad, but they didn't pay for like the production of it. So he just did like a selfie video, and then all his product like online, like the sales like went way up. So it was like successful. I missed that too. I read about it online. Anyway,
I wonder if Affleck and Damon were like, you know what? We'll do this for scale because we just love to hang out with Tom for a day.
But Ben Affleck's so associated with Dunkin' Donuts, he's helped them like probably a decent amount, frankly, because there's all those photos of him looking all depressed, smoking a cigarette and stuff.
I'm wondering if Tim's got the outfit yet, because Tim is from Massachusetts.
Yeah, we got to get that.
He's probably got Dunkin' in his blood.
That should be your family outfit for Halloween next year.
Yeah,
I grew up on Dunkin', but I've definitely left. Dunkin's not very good. Let's be honest.
You're a Starbucks guy now.
It's not. Yeah, it's not.
Now you're a New Yorker, so
I'm a local neighborhood coffee stop guy.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
I've left the big brand.
You know what is good at Dunkin' Donuts is their hash browns. They are amazing. It's like $1.
Those are good. Yes, the hash browns are good. Yep. All right. I had this question in the rundown just because the 49ers, 3 straight NFC championship games, they won one. They've now lost 3 straight Super Bowls. It's been 30 years since that franchise won a Super Bowl. So right in this moment, would you rather be a Jets fan or a 49ers fan?
Good question.
I would say 49ers probably because I mean, being a Jets fan sounds like a tough existence, but
they have wins along the way to their loss.
It's kind of like
as opposed to
there's a thing like 49ers fans are tired of falling short all the time. Jets fans are tired of not even being able to have the chance to fall short. So that it just depends on like what you want. Like that's why this offseason's been so fascinating to me, comparing the Jets to other teams, because you look at all these teams that had double-digit wins, went on runs. 49ers fired their defensive coordinator this week. The Eagles changed both coordinators. The Cowboys lost Dan Quinn, but like they're revamping their staff. Like all the Niners have to revamp like a decent amount of their staff actually, because they lost Clint Kubiak, they lost a couple other guys. These like really good teams either lose coaches for like better jobs, or they are firing them because they're getting impatient because things aren't working. And then you have the Jets, who obviously are running it back. And, we don't need to go too deep into that. We've talked about that a lot. But the Nathaniel Hackett part of it is just like fascinating to me. That Steve Wilkes, and look, I get there's some other things beyond. It wasn't just the Super Bowl that got him fired. I think it sounds like there was a lot of issues with like communication, and that Kyle Shanahan wasn't happy with a lot of the stuff he was doing all year. It was just a bad fit. I think he's a good coach. But you fire a defensive coordinator like a few days after losing the Super Bowl. That's insane to me. And the Eagles too, like everybody wanted Nick Sirianni fired throughout the season that they start. I know they had a terrible collapse, and at the end of it, you're like, okay, they are kind of a mess. But it's just the dichotomy between a team like the Jets and a team like the Eagles and 49ers is so fascinating. I think ultimately the 49ers are a very interesting comparison for the Jets, because I think on paper, I know the 49ers have a lot of talent. They have more offensive talent for sure, but defensively, I think their talent is pretty comparable. The Jets should have a better quarterback with Aaron Rodgers than Brock Purdy. You have Breece Hall, not as good as Christian McCaffrey, but a little bit closer than I think nationally people realize. Garrett Wilson, I'd take him over Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk might not even want to be there anymore. Anyway, the point being, like they run a similar scheme defensively. They have a lot of talent. The Jets just haven't been able to put it together, and they make a lot of mistakes. They shoot themselves in the foot and all that stuff. Whereas the 49ers are very well coached and seem to do the right things until the Super Bowl, when you don't really give your offensive weapons the ball in overtime or whatever. But I think I'd still take the 49ers overall over the Jets. But I do think if the Jets can keep Aaron Rodgers upright, can fix the O-line, like I think it's a lot closer than people might realize.
You mentioned the San Francisco firing their coach. The Jets do have new coaches. We haven't talked about that on this pod. So let's get into that a little bit. Minor changes, obviously. Weird changes at the receiver spot where you kind of have a new coach and the old coach was there. But get us caught up on that, Zach.
Yeah. Well, so first, Taylor Embry was fired as the running backs coach. He actually got hired by the Patriots. Which is always interesting when Jets people go to New England, but they replaced him with Tony Dews, the Titans coach. He coached Derrick Henry for a while, and then last year, after the Titans fired Todd Downing and Keith Carter, they rearranged everything, and he became a tight ends coach for the Titans last year. And then the Jets brought him in because they have to have every Titans coach has to be in New York because the Giants hired a bunch too. It's been like the most fascinating. The only Titans coach that doesn't have
except Vrabel
is Mike Vrabel. Yeah. So I think I covered Tony Dews when he was the receivers coach at University of Arizona way back in the day. So I known him a while. I think he's a very good coach. Obviously, it's hard to tell how good a coach is when he has Derrick Henry as his pupil, because he's going to make you look smart. He's one of those coaches that makes you look like a better coach no matter what. But I think he's the right coach to get this running back group going, get Breece Hall to the next level. Wide receivers, they hired Sean Jefferson, who was their receivers coach a few years ago, actually. The situation was weird. They hired him while still having Zach Azzanni on staff, and they essentially said, you can either go and find another job or we'll like reassign you, kind of thing, which is like a very like I compared it to Office Space with the guy that was just cashing a paycheck in the basement and he had a stapler and all that stuff, and everybody forgot that he was there, and then they finally stopped paying him, and then he burned the building down. But so Zach Azzanni got hired by the Steelers, actually, so he got another job. Sean Jefferson, he's an experienced coach. The receivers were not very good last year. I don't know that you can blame it on Azzanni necessarily. Like Alan Lazard, I don't know what he could have done. Randall Cobb, I don't know what he could have done. I think he did a good job coaching up Xavier Gibson, who's an undrafted rookie. Like he didn't really have a lot of like great tools to work with, I would say. But Garrett Wilson got better. Bigger problem was they weren't getting him the ball when he was open. So take with that what you will. They haven't filled the job that we reported on, where we said that they were looking at adding a coach to the offensive staff to kind of like reduce Hackett's role. I don't know what the progress has been, if they've talked to more people. I know one of the guys they talked to got hired elsewhere. I can't really say who. He got a better job elsewhere. So I don't know if they're going to fill that or what's going on with that, or if they haven't really announced the coaching staff changes yet. So that could be coming at some point. So yeah, that's in the coaching staff. That's happened. And in the front office, I think when we did our last podcast is when they moved on from, or the news came out about them moving on from Rex Hogan. Chad Alexander left for the Chargers to be the assistant GM over there. which in theory he could have just been the assistant GM here because they just lost Rex Hogan, but he decided to go to Los Angeles, which is notable. Like Joe Douglas just lost his right and left hand, as Connor described it. He lost Chad Alexander and Rex Hogan, his number 2 and his number 3, essentially. So those are pretty big losses from Joe's perspective, and I don't know how they're going to fix it, or fill those roles, or if they will, or if they'll just promote internally. I don't get the sense that they're going to be making a lot of hirings outside the building, but those are notable losses, even if fans are mad about how things have gone personnel wise or draft wise. Like these are people that have been Joe Douglas's like right next to him, and now he used to learn on the fly with somebody new and all that stuff. So it's all notable, and it's interesting that they're losing all these people.
All right, we are going to do, actually, you know what? Our winner is here. So before we get to Zach's 10 steps to the off season and what to do, why don't we welcome in Ian Bavona, who is the champion, the season-long picks. And Ian, thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to bring up the standings here just so everybody can take a look and see that at the top,
impressive
a big
stuff.
Postseason run, and you kind of ran away with this thing. 4 points better than Jimbo Brennan, who was kind of at the top most of the season. You made a late run. You won 4 weeks. I think 2 of those at least were in the playoffs, but 55% for the season. Very solid work. And I think in the postseason, when you really pulled away, I think you were 11 of 13. Does that sound right?
Yeah, something like that. I know I had a big week, like the last week of the regular season, and then I think like wild card round, I won 5 of 6 or something along those lines. And it's all luck. Gotta give it back.
Congrats, though. That's great work by you.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean,
so go ahead, Marissa.
I was just gonna say, like, did any of these picks earn you any actual winnings aside from just the glory of being on the Can't Wait podcast?
Unfortunately, not. This is my reward. I live in Washington.
I'm sorry.
So it's not legal here, but yeah, no. Unfortunately, or fortunately, being on the podcast is the best reward anyone can.
Oh, thank you. We're gonna figure out something to send you too. We want to give you.
The Can't Wait care package is
sweet.
Coming soon.
Development. So we got your address. So just talk about you're a Jets fan, obviously. Talk about how that started and how you're feeling right now.
Yeah. So both my parents grew up on Long Island. I grew up in Virginia, so I was surrounded by Washington Commanders fans. Now is the name, but yeah, my first year of watching football, or first 2 years, were the 2 AFC Championship runs. So I was like, okay, this is awesome. I mean, every year is going to be like this, playing deep into January. And then from then on, it just kind of trailed down and continued to trail down. I guess the past low point was being at the butt fumble game. It was my first Jets home game that I was able to go to growing up in Virginia. And then we were sitting like near the end zone where the Patriots scored those, 4 or 5 touchdowns in that second quarter there. So
oh my God,
that wasn't too fun. And then I guess the most recent low point was, 4 snaps into this year. But it is what it is. Love the Jets. Sit down every week and watch them. So I'm just hoping for a little more success this year.
Are you hopeful for this year? Like, has this season beaten you down, or are you still optimistic that with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, this team's going to be ready to go?
I like to think of myself as an optimistic person by nature. So, I mean, obviously, when you lose a Hall of Fame guy that early into the year, there's going to be some downturn that goes on with the rest of the team. But I'm hoping if they can solidify that offensive line, then a little more success this year. Hopefully, make a playoff run, and yeah.
So who was like your favorite player when you were first becoming a Jets fan?
Probably Revis. I'm sure that's a pretty common answer.
Yeah.
I've always been a defensive fan. Probably stems from watching the Jets.
Yeah.
Throughout my years, their defense has always been much better than the offensive side of the ball. But yeah, I mean, back when I was in like middle school and high school, watching Muhammad Wilkerson, that was a lot of fun before everything happened with him. But that 2015 year, he was just unblockable. So that was he's probably a close second there.
Awesome. So you're loving Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams these days then, right?
Definitely. How could you not?
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned those two AFC Championship runs. We actually have in our athletic audio team, we have a UK side that covers all the international soccer Premier League stuff podcasts. And we have a producer over there who came here on his honeymoon during one of those postseasons and is still a Jets fan because he decided to honeymoon in New York City when the Jets were randomly making it to the AFC Championship game.
He picked it.
Poor guy.
I was like, you could just not pay attention. You live in, another continent, but he's all in. He's a big football guy though. He stayed up for the Super Bowl till 4 a.m.
Wow.
Oh man, good for him.
All right. Well, Ian, thank you so much for coming on. First of all, we appreciate it in the middle of the morning, and for participating all year long. One thing I wanted to bring up at the bottom of this first page, Zach. Oh, I thought you were there. You go.
Oh, there he is. I see him.
49.24.
So I was best on the Can't Wait podcast then? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I may have stopped at some point.
I
made it all the way through the regular season.
Very early, so.
Yeah. You guys don't see me because I'm so high up there. I'm 100%.
Oh, right.
So,
right.
like, even Ian, I just,
Yeah, I think her name was right next to mine. So.
yeah, exactly. I actually think I did granted, I was on maternity leave. I did have a, little baby, but I'm like, all right, I'm going to be out and dominate this. And that was 1 week. So props to you, Ian, for not only making great picks, but remembering to do it every week. Because
that was the challenge for me. Yeah.
I would be the games would start and I'm like,
the Thursday game I would forget pretty frequently.
Yeah, that was a challenge to remember. And then I live in Washington, so games start at 10 a.m. So usually, 9:30, 9:45, I'm pulling up the Gridiron Games thing to make my picks. So it was all luck at the end.
Well, good job.
Yeah, shout out to Gridiron Games for offering a free option for doing a pool like that too. We should give them a little credit. All right, Ian, thanks so much, man, for coming on. Enjoy the off season, and hopefully this Jets team can get you back in a high note for not just your picks, but the team itself next year.
Yes.
Definitely. Back-to-back off-season champs.
That's right.
Right. Always. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, have a good one, Ian.
Bye, and look out for a Can't Wait swag package coming soon.
All right. Awesome.
Thanks, Ian.
All right. Congratulations to Ian Bavona. 4-point win. He really ran away with it in the postseason. All right, let's get back to the offseason. And just this week, do you want to start with the salary cap stuff, Zach, or do you want to get into your 10 steps plan?
Well, before I do that, I should, because we haven't talked since this happened. Woody Johnson spoke for the first time on the red carpet before the NFL honors. Wasn't a lot of surprising stuff he said, though. The thing that caught on is when he said that we didn't have a backup quarterback last year.
Yeah, he threw Zach under the bus. Yep.
I'm not sure why he did that, but I get the message, they need to be better if Rodgers goes down. But I don't know if you want to go out there and say stuff like that. Look, I don't think it actually hurts the trade value because I don't know that Zach had much anyway, but that didn't really get the point of him saying that specifically. But, it was mostly stuff about him saying about how he's told the coaching staff about how mad he is and all that stuff. And normally the owner will talk to the media, the local media in an interview setting at the end of the season. They decided not to do that this year. They let him do it at the red carpet. I don't know. We'll probably talk to him not again until owners meetings. And by then they'll have done free agency and all that stuff. He wasn't asked about our article or anything, but it's pretty clear that it's a win now kind of, playoff mandate type season, even if he's not going to say it directly, as we all kind of knew. But, when you hear the owner actually say how impatient he is and all that stuff, I'm just curious to see what this offseason looks like in terms of spending, how much he approves, what Joe Douglas is able to do, because they have a lot of stuff they have to do and it's not going to be cheap. So.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. And I don't know if we really wanted to hear from Woody on the red carpet, but we got it anyway. All right, 10 steps off-season plan from Zach. This article is out on The Athletic. You can join right now for $2 a month for a year. theathletic.com/can't wait. Number one on the list. Was this a in order list or is this?
Yeah, it was more
it's definitely not most important.
It was more sequentially the things that would happen. Or I think people interpreted it initially as like most important, which I should have been more clear. Like, trading Zach Wilson
because
is
number
number
one
that's not the most important thing.
is trade Zach Wilson.
It's just the thing that I think might happen the soonest, essentially. So,
I mean, at this point, what do you think they get?
Something like a 5th or 6th, or a conditional 5th that can turn into a 4th, depending on playing time, like something like that. I think they'll get that. It's possible there's no interest, and they just either have to settle for like a conditional 7th or something like that. I don't think it'll get to that. I do think Zach has shown enough flashes that there'll be somebody that will trade for him. I really do believe that. Maybe I'm naive, but
I think you're right, because I think people look at this offensive staff and how the team was run, and you know what I mean, and what he's been through from a coaching standpoint, and say like, well, we have better coaches, we'll do better.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Yeah, like there's talent there. Like, he's never going to be like an ace starting quarterback who's going to dominate the league or anything, but he can be a good backup at the very least, and maybe a good coaching staff can develop him into more, put him into a situation with less pressure, where he can focus on development, and then maybe you have something there. But ultimately, he's just not going to be a Jet. I think that's obvious. That's been obvious for a while, but this is when it's going to happen finally, and it could happen. I would say at some point between now and the start of free agency is when you would hope it would happen, I would say. So the combine might be where it heats up in a couple weeks, when everybody's kind of there together, the GMs, all that stuff. I don't know that it'll happen then, but I think it's coming at some point between now and the start of free agency in middle of March is my prediction.
All right, number 2, make a decision on Laken Tomlinson.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because he is an $18 million cap hit. You can't go into next season paying him that much, especially as they need to clear a lot of cap. So you need to decide, do we just want to restructure and push him dead money to the future? Can we get him to do a pay cut? I think that's the best case scenario. Or do we just straight up cut him? And while I think a lot of fans want him cut, I do think it's important to remember they need to fill at least 2 starting jobs on the offensive line. You're creating another hole there. And the odds of you being able to spend enough money to get 3 upgrades at tackle, and guard are not very good. So as much as I know the fan base has kind of soured on Laken, he's consistently healthy, and he has some really bad games. He's been solid at times. I think you run it back with him for a year if you can get him to do a pay cut. If not, you move on, you figure it out, find a guy for a cheaper cost. But ultimately, like Laken's not going to make that much money on the open market, so that's why maybe he would. That's why you had Carl Lawson agreeing to a pay cut last year, which kind of backfired, because now they're essentially paying Carl Lawson $6 million this year to not play for them. But you see if he'll do a pay cut, and if he doesn't, you move on, is essentially what it comes down to with him. Like, they don't have as many guys as usual this year that they can cut for cap savings. It's CJ Uzomah, it's Laken Tomlinson are essentially it. Unless you want to throw in CJ Mosley, you'd save $17 million, which is obviously very tempting, but he's the leader of the defense. He's the Aaron Rodgers of the defense. That defense needs him in ways beyond the football, but for whatever reason, it seems like some fans have soured on him. I think he's been pretty good. Like, his athleticism is not quite there anymore, and he's not as good in coverage, but I think he's a solid linebacker. He's a big reason why Quincy Williams has developed into what he is. Like, you do what you can to bring him back, whether you extend him for a couple of years and it's like, maybe the last 2 years aren't guaranteed, or you're restructured and you're just tacking on some dead cap. You can't carry a $21 million cap hit on him, but I just don't see them cutting him. If that would be if somebody were to ask me what's a surprise cut, I guess Mosley maybe would be the one you would think about, but I don't think they're going to do that. So I think we should get that out of our minds. But those are like the only ones you can really cut and save. And JFM as well, but he's like a player that's too good to just straight up cut, even if his cap hit's a little high. So they have some interesting decisions to make. There's going to be a lot of restructuring. We go into like some of the other things they can do in here, and my salary cap thing. They can extend DJ Reed, reduce his cap hit. They can extend Tyler Conklin. There's avenues to create a lot of cap space. It's going to make the cap sheet kind of like unwieldy in the coming years, but they're kind of all in on this year, and Joe Douglas is fighting for his job. So like, what does he have to lose? The key is getting Woody Johnson to sign off on it, but I don't see why he wouldn't, because it's time for them to win now. And so that you spend on offensive linemen, you spend on wide receivers, you definitely spend on a backup quarterback. Everything else, I think you can fill with like mid-level guys, but those positions on offense they need to spend money on.
Sometimes you got to create the bad money situation to have a winner on the field, and then you deal with the aftermath afterwards. You mentioned Reed and Conklin. That was number 3. Number 4, and this is This is maybe the biggest one on this list, right? Is make a difficult decision on Bryce Huff.
Yeah.
And you have a full article also out about Bryce Huff, but man, it just feels like the opportunity is past, right? Like they needed to get him signed a year ago.
Yeah, I just like he's not going to give the Jets a discount, and I ultimately like yes, you can structure the contract so the cap hit is low this year, but then you're paying a lot of defensive linemen a lot of money, and while I think they should do it because he's a homegrown guy, he's 25 years old, he's an elite pass rusher. As other people have pointed out, like if you think about it, they weren't really playing with a lot of leads this last year. So while he only played less than 50% of the snaps, he still got 10 sacks. And now imagine if they're playing with leads and they have to rush the passer a lot more. Like that was the idea when they drafted Will McDonald. We're gonna keep coming at you. And so if they're better next year, you have Bryce Huff, you have Jermaine Johnson, you have JFM, you have Will McDonald. I think that's like as good of a defensive end group as you're going to find in the league. But the owner also has to be willing to pay a backup $17 million a year, which is a lot of money to commit to a guy who's never been a full-time starter. So I don't think he's going to come back. I think he's probably asking for $20 million a year in free agency. And I just don't see, they didn't really offer him anything during the season. There was like discussions. The Jets ultimately decided they weren't going to, extend anybody during the season. They were tight against the cap sheet. I think that was a mistake. They're going to regret letting him go. I think the best teams like sign their young guys before they hit free agency. And yeah, Michael Dunn just said, imagine if Huff signs with Buffalo, that'd be scary. Like that's also the fear. He goes to a team that's where he just starts terrorizing you every year. And so I think there's a lot of teams, even ones that already have great pass rushers, that might look at Bryce Huff as like, all right, we can bring this guy in and he can just rush the passer for us. And teams with cap space and stuff like that. Like teams that are like blitzing. He the interesting thing about him is he can play in a 3-4 and a 4-3 because he's so fast. So he can play up as like an outside linebacker, or he can go down as a defensive end. And so that kind of opens his market up even more. I think he's going to wind up with one of the biggest contracts in free agency. And I just don't think the Jets are going to pay him.
I'm going to skip a little bit. We won't hit all 10 of these. Invest in the offensive line, though, is obviously, I said Bryce Huff was maybe the biggest thing, but really it's probably the offensive line.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Some of it depends on what position they're planning on putting AVT at, because that kind of like dictates what they're going to do. Maybe they base it on who they can get, and then they figure out their best 5 kind of thing.
That's one benefit of him, right? It broadens what you can go after because you can
for sure
move him to fill what's left.
So like if I was doing it, I would spend the most money on like whatever top offensive lineman they can get, preferably a tackle. I think Mike Onwenu from the Patriots is the most intriguing to me. I know Tyron Smith is very tempting because he's elite, but he's also getting older and he plays around 10 games a year. So you're adding another injury prone guy. There's Trent Brown on the Patriots, Jermaine Eluemunor on the Raiders. Sorry. Andrews Pete on the Saints. Like there's some like solid guys. The top guys are Tyron Smith, Trent Brown, and Mike Onwenu. They should try and get one of those guys. Brown and Smith are both injury prone, and they should not be going after injury prone guys. So there's risk. Like every year, a team is going to overpay the top offensive lineman and the top wide receiver in free agency, and it often does not work out. I mean, the Jets signed Allen Lazard last year. The Giants signed Kenny Golladay, Nate Solder. Like there's a reason an offensive lineman is hitting free agency, most likely, but the Jets don't really have the luxury of like waiting and hoping that a rookie can come in and fix everything. So I think you spend a lot of money on one guy, you sign, whether, depending on whether they bring Lakin back or not, you sign another guy either for depth or as a starter, and then you draft the third guy that you need to start, and ideally at left tackle. So you sign Mike Onwenu is what I would do. He'd play your right tackle. You draft, the guy from Penn State 10th or the Talisi Fuaga from Oregon State at 10, plug him in at left tackle, and then either sign a guard or, bring back Lakin. And then you have a pretty solid, like you don't need stars on your offensive line. You just need a solid group that can stay healthy and stay on the field together. So the number one priority this offseason is Joe Douglas has to fix the offensive line. He might need 2 different starting offensive tackles, and that's a lot to figure out there. It might not wind up being the sexy names that fans want, because they also have to want to come to the Jets, and the Jets have to be willing to pay them. And some of these guys, they might have to pay more than if the Chiefs want to sign a guy, it's not going to cost them as much as if the Jets do ultimately. So there are some challenges with trying to fill all your needs in free agency, but there are avenues for Joe Douglas to improve this group vastly, and he has to do it at all costs.
All right. Don't overspend on a number 2 wide receiver. And you have a great stat here of basically the top earning free agent wide receivers over the last 5 years. And man, I mean, 2 of them are Jets, right? Corey Davis makes the list. Alan Lazard is obviously a nightmare. But the fact is, signing high expensive free agent receivers doesn't tend to work out.
Yeah. And it starts like this every year. The free agent class on paper looks amazing right now because you have T. Higgins, right, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman. I don't think any of those guys are actually going to hit free agency. I think they'll either get franchise tagged or re-sign where they are. I think the ones that could hit are Calvin Ridley and Marquise Brown at the top. And I think Ridley, they'll go after. I don't know. I'm not as convinced that they're going to be able to reel him in because I think he's going to have a lot of interest. He's going to cost a lot of money, though. It's going to be $17 million a year for the guy who is very talented, but, I don't think he had a perfect year in Jacksonville. Marquise Brown, he's injury prone, very talented, has some ties to the new receivers coach. I'm intrigued by Marquise Brown because he's explosive and he brings a little different element than Garrett Wilson. But again, like usually if you're paying the most for a receiver in free agency, odds are it's like the history is not very good, as I said. Like in the list that I had, I think the one that was like the only one you could call like a full-on success would be Christian Kirk. And I don't think that's like a resounding success. And Jacoby Myers was fine for the Raiders last year. But again, like if they're all in on this year, like whatever, you just do it. I think there are some options maybe in a trade they could pursue. There's Cortland Sutton from the Broncos. I'm intrigued at the idea of Deontay Johnson from the Steelers because, he had some last year. It seemed like he clashed with that coaching staff a bit. There's some other ones like on like a second tier. There's like Gabe Davis from the Bills in free agency. I wouldn't be shocked if they go more towards that tier with Gabe Davis. I mean, I wouldn't sign Odell Beckham, but he's like in that next tier, like somebody like that. And then you draft another guy because I think it's a pretty talented receiver class, whether that's in the first round or the third round or whatever. You can get a really good receiver in the draft. They didn't draft any last year. And so I think you need to get a new number 2 and you probably need a new number 3 receiver. I wouldn't rely on Lazard for either of those.
What about with Rodgers back? Do you think they're tempted to just think that Lazard will be fine?
I don't think you can bank on him being anything because he literally looked like a practice squad player last year. So, like the least productive receiver in the NFL, you can't go into the season relying on him. They're paying him, and it's going to hurt to pay $11 million or whatever his cap hit is, $14 million for a number 4 receiver. But you can't bank on him. Then if he's good, then you have a bunch of good receivers. Like they just need to have more options. It seemed like they had great depth last year. Then Corey Davis retires, and all of a sudden you're starting Randall Cobb and you're getting rid of Mecole Hardman and all that crap that happened last year. But they just need to be better prepared. They need to have more weapons for Aaron Rodgers. Ideally, you address as much as you can in free agency. So when you're in the draft, it's not like so obvious what you're doing. And so you don't have what happened last year where the Steelers trade up right in front of you and steal the offensive lineman. So ideally, you sign as many of these guys as you can. So when you go into the draft, you can just pick the best offensive player on the board, even if that means picking a tight end. Like you need to put yourself in position to get the best possible player and not just like telegraph who you're going to pick.
I'll skip over. Don't just sign Aaron Rodgers' friends, obviously, but do sign a real backup quarterback. Back to the Woody Johnson comments, and you have Jacoby Brissett or Ryan Tannehill as your targets.
Yeah, I think they make the most sense for a lot of reasons. They are going to cost. I mean, the going rate for backups, I think, is going to be pretty wild this offseason just because you saw last year how many teams need them. Like, I'm curious what happens to Joe Flacco, honestly, because I feel like he has to get a job now. I don't know if it'll be with the Browns or not, but like I imagine he'll get a backup job somewhere. But yeah, a guy like Jacoby Brissett, I know the Jets like he cost the Commanders $8 million last year. It'll probably be more, but I think it's worth it. Tannehill has ties to this coaching staff with Todd Downing and Keith Carter. The Steelers have been floated as a possibility for him because they hired Arthur Smith. I just think those are guys that maybe they're not going to go and win you a Super Bowl if Rodgers goes down, but they're going to be able to function as an offense, and this should be a playoff team. This could be a playoff team with Ryan Tannehill or Jacoby Brissett. Gardner Minshew is another one. I think he's going to get a chance to be a starter or to compete to be one. I was adding it up earlier, actually. I think there's going to be like 8 teams that I'm not exactly sure who their starter is going to be. I'll just tell them. So I have the Patriots, who you think would draft one, the Steelers, the Raiders, the Broncos, the Vikings, although I think Cousins probably winds up going back, but who knows? The Falcons, the Seahawks, and the Washington Commanders, who will draft one. So it's I mean, I guess you could say the Bears technically, but I mean, they're obviously just going to draft Caleb Williams. So those are 8 teams. And I think Gardner Minshew should get a shot to start because I don't think there are 8 quarterbacks out there better than Gardner Minshew that you can go and add right now off of free agency. So I don't see him going to the Jets for that reason. But anyway, yeah, that's an absolute priority. Woody Johnson kind of put his foot down and made it clear that you would think he'd be willing to spend on a better one. I actually saw an interesting one floated that the Jets should trade for Sam Howell on Washington because they're going to get a new quarterback, new coaching staff. He's proved he's good enough to be a starter, and he's young, so you can kind of develop him a little bit. So I'm intrigued by that because he's financially that won't cost as much as like a Jacoby. So I'd be up for that too if the Jets were interested.
Number 10, I think we kind of already covered this, but draft O-line or an offensive weapon early, but then a developmental quarterback late, which is probably key here because eventually you need a backup quarterback that you've actually developed in-house.
Yeah, like the quarterback factory thing that Eagles fans make fun of for Howie Roseman, it's good practice to be drafting late quarterbacks late in the draft, where if you look at the guys that Jets drafted in the later rounds last year, it's guys like Zaire Barnes at linebacker, Jarek Bernard-Converse. These are guys that did not do anything for the team. And I get why you signed them. You signed them in theory to help on special teams or whatever. They just didn't wind up being anything. So that's where you should be taking flyers on guys with tools, guys at quarterback. Develop somebody. Aaron Rodgers is going to be 41 next season. I'm not saying this guy they draft in the 4th round, 5th round is going to be like a starter necessarily, but you take a swing and you hope you find the next Brock Purdy.
Hey, I was going to say Tom Brady, Brock Purdy. They happen every once in a while.
Or I wouldn't even, if they hypothetically traded back in the 1st round and picked up a 2nd round pick, I'd be interested in Michael Penix from Washington in the 2nd round. Like, why not get one of these guys that has some legit talent? And then, in theory, maybe you roll with that guy as your number 2, I guess, or you don't have to, but I don't know. I just think they need to be very open to the possibility of drafting a quarterback, not in the 1st round necessarily, unless they're in love with somebody who's there at 10, but it's time to develop a quarterback, and whether that guy becomes your number 2 long-term or your number 1, they have to do it.
All right. So that's the plan. Just roll it out, do it. And playoffs, here we come, right?
Just open up my article, Joe Douglas, plug in your subscription, and then just do the offseason that way, and then you'll be good.
Everyone in the NFL subscribes to The Athletic.
Well, some people from the Jets might have unsubscribed after a couple weeks ago, but
that's fair. Did you get much? Have you heard much from the team? I mean, this is probably something we should.
We're in a stretch of the offseason where we're not really interacting with the team very much right now, so there hasn't really been anything. And the combine's going to be the first time, but the interesting thing about the combine is Saleh never goes. Usually does a Zoom, but Joe Douglas will talk, so he'll kind of be the first person besides Woody to talk since our article, since the end of the season, all that stuff, and it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of topics to cover with Joe in a couple weeks, so.
All right, we look forward to it, and that's probably around when we'll be back. A couple of weeks back here on the podcast.
I'll see Marissa in person. No Tim though.
Again, you guys, I feel like you guys see each other all the time. Never in Jersey, where you both live.
All over.
Good point.
Cleveland, Indianapolis, all the best cities.
Yes. Excited for it.
All right, that's going to do it for. Actually, we should record from there, right? When Zach's there.
Yeah, we did that last time. Yeah, we should be able to do that again. Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Can't Wait podcast. Thanks for everybody for tuning in live, or if you're checking out the audio after the fact, appreciate it. Thanks to Ian Bavona for joining us on the show. The care package is on the way, Ian. So check your mail for that over the next couple of weeks, and we'll talk to everybody again soon. Bye.